Hi everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. Before we start our show today, I want to give a big thank you to Aidan Meyer, who has been doing summer work here, and he's been our cameraman on Here We Are. He has had a lot of experience. He started day one with Here We Are in our first show. He came back from college this summer, and he's done all of our summer shows. So thank you, Aidan. We are always grateful to have you here. It's always a pleasure. Today on Here We Are, we have Fred Homer as our guest. Fred is a jack of all trades and a master of many. He might be blushing at that. From blacksmithing to carpentry to creating sculpture using these two skills of his. And Fred is also a wildlife rehabilitator. He has amazing stories about this. And for a shy guy, he is one of the best storytellers around.
Oh my.
So, welcome, Fred.
Nice to be here. Nice to be here.
Yes. Almost a guest who needs no introduction, but that was one.
Well, I am really curious as to what kinds of questions you're going to ask me.
Okay, we'll try to pull some out of the hat for you. I'd love to dive right in, and I think most people know you as your wildlife rehabilitation mini program that you have going on at your own home. And can you tell us a story about one of your first experiences of animals or wildlife?
Well, first experiences. Wendy, it's always interesting, what initiates which. I always was attracted to nature and spent a lot of time in nature. And when I was a little bitty kid, 5, 6 years of age, I found a dead bird. I remember the iridescence. I think it might have been a starling. I thought it was something that I wanted to keep, and so I took it up into my room and I put it in a top drawer in my bureau. And not too long thereafter, my mother smelled the smell and discovered it. And that was sort of my first inclination that some things weren't going to stay as they were found.
Yeah.
I had many rocks and branches and collections of things, but live birds was a short-lived acquisition.
So to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a first taste of mortality too, right?
Absolutely. My mom was great because she allowed me to explore and learn through mishaps. I found praying mantis cocoons. I don't know if you know, there's sort of these, they look like styrofoam globs the size of a ping pong ball. I'm not even sure I knew what they were, but I brought some of these home and put them somewhere in my room. Wendy, these things hatched, and there were, if not there were hundreds, probably thousands of these miniature praying mantises climbing up my wall.
Oh my God.
I don't know how that was resolved.
Right.
I'm hoping my mother didn't use a vacuum cleaner, but I wouldn't be critical if she did.
You could understand. Yeah, a plague of locusts.
Yeah, a plague. There you go. But I always had snakes and turtles and tadpoles and chrysalises.
Yeah. And was this mostly a solitary activity of yours, going out into the woods and nature?
It was. I played as a kid. We grew up. We were playing baseball, pickup games. We didn't have Little League. Didn't even exist back then. But I also spent a lot of solitary time just out and about, finding stuff.
And bring them home.
Bringing it home. And again, I don't want to overdo the having a wonderful mother, but I would bring home seed pods and things like that, a branch that had a nice configuration. And, rather than saying, Fred, get this out of here, she would put it in a vase and arrange it and have it on the coffee table.
Wow.
And so she really encouraged my interest.
That's real support. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So how was school for you, being such an outdoor guy?
It never made any sense. It never made any sense even in college. I just I was so wanting to be somewhere else. Yeah. And I wasn't strong academically. I'll bet you in this day and age, I might even had some sort of a diagnostic term given to me. But fortunately, I had a couple of teachers, Miss Harper in 5th grade, 36 kids, as I recall,
Yeah.
all by herself.
Wow.
No special needs teachers, no reading specialists. She had the whole kit and caboodle. But she really enjoyed me, and I had some artistic talent, and she would not defer to me, but ask me to get the group together to make the posters for the upcoming fair or circus or whatever it was.
And you were also doing some writing at that time too, or
Yeah,
in
5th
school.
grade. Yeah, early on in 5th grade. Yep, and I can remember bringing things home. My mom was always really encouraging. She would say, "Well, I love the way you described how you were walking up the hill to the little house," and my dad would pick it up and look at it and say, "You misspelled such and such in the third sentence, and that's a run-on sentence." So it was,
Yeah. And your dad worked for RCA Victor, is that correct?
Yes, in Camden, New Jersey.
Yes, and he was also a musician.
He was a singer, professional singer. Yeah.
So you've got all kinds of different creative influences at a very early age.
I would say so. Yeah.
And you went on to work at some point. I'm not really sure where this lies, but the Academy of Natural Sciences.
Yeah, that was a wonderful experience. 2 summers I worked there, and I was in charge of the programs that would be presented to the audiences that would come to the Academy. That involved handling hawks, owls. We had a Mexican beaded lizard.
Oh, wow. These are all live animals. These are not dioramas. Yeah,
and it was so great. We had a porcupine that had been raised, and I can remember I would be in a short sleeve shirt, and I would reach under the carrying case and pick it up, and people would go, "Ooh." They don't have quills on their underside, and I would ask, "How could I possibly be doing this?" It was a lot of fun. So I did that, and then I used to teach a 5-day program. A spotlight on living things, and it was 2 days of reptiles, a day of birds, a day of mammals, and a day of insects.
Wow.
And these were inner city kids that would come. And it was so great, Wendy. These kids, I mean, they were just eyes wide open, and I got this wonderful note, and I have saved it all of these years, from a little girl who wrote me this note: "Dear Mr. Homer, thank you. When I first came, I was afraid of snakes, but now every time I see a snake, I'll think of you." So.
That's wonderful. That's saying a lot. And so did that kind of pique your interest in teaching? Because you had a bit of a career as a teacher. I
did have a career. Did it peak? It certainly tweaked, and I incorporated into my classroom lots of. I had a ferret. I had a snake, several snakes, turtles. I used to bring my dog to school. Things were so different then, Wendy. I don't think teachers are now in Vermont allowed to have live animals in their classroom.
Probably not.
But it allowed me to continue with my interest.
And you were able to get away with that.
And I was able to get away with it, yeah.
Did you take them outside a lot?
Oh, gosh, we got out of the classroom whenever we could.
And what grade level was this?
5th and 6th grades.
Good ages for that.
Yeah. And then I was in Cherry Hill for 4 years, married, 2 children from previous marriage, and one day I just realized I could be anywhere that I wanted to be, and I love to ski. I just sent out applications and landed a job at Whitingham School in Whitingham, Vermont.
In Vermont. You had your eye on Vermont a little bit, though, for the skiing.
Oh, I did. I did indeed. Yeah. And my former wife and I drove. We met Don Ford, the principal, went into the nurse's room. He was sitting in the dentist chair that was there. I was sitting on a stool. My wife was in a chair. We talked. He said, "I want to call down and see if the superintendent's available." Bob Burnell came up, and so the 4 of us were there talking. I said, I wonder if such head of the school committee is. He came up on his motorcycle. So we were all sitting there, and it was almost a done deal there. They said they just needed to make a further check to make sure I wasn't some weirdo.
Yes, right. A little bit of a background check, but not much.
Not much.
Again,
not
something
much.
that probably wouldn't happen today
I don't
either.
think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
So you got pretty ensconced in Vermont.
Oh yeah.
Yes,
absolutely.
And you were teaching for a number of years.
8 years in Vermont.
Uh-huh.
Went through one of those midlife crises and went through a divorce. Then I applied for a job in Rowe, Massachusetts, and took a teaching position there. Then became an administrator after several years. And Wendy, you know, what is it? The Peter Principle, rising to your level of incompetence.
Exactly.
Oh, Lord have mercy. I was no more suited to be a principal of an elementary school than a neurosurgeon. I just, it wasn't working out well.
Yeah. But you got bitten by another bug, right?
Well, the bug for blacksmithing bug? Yeah. So I remarried, and Debbie Feiner, physical therapist, great job, and she said, Fred, you know, this is a good time to be evaluating your life, and help me with the mathematics. We've been together for 40 years.
Yeah.
So I would have been 40 years
40 years
old.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, 40, yeah.
And I used to hang out with this delightful guy, Percy Dodge, and he had a old tumbling down barn where he would do iron work, and I just used to enjoy hanging out with him.
Yeah.
He habitually smoked Camel cigarettes and was chewing tobacco both at the same time.
Wow.
So Debbie said, well, you know, there's a shop on Western Avenue. Why don't you see, maybe they need somebody.
Yeah.
And I called, and they said, yeah, we're looking for somebody. I said, when can I start? And Lee Morrell, who was...
Lee Morrell, right, yeah,
said,
in West Brat for a number of years. Yes, and so you did that for a while, but you weren't able to do your own work. But you were learning. You were
I was
a lot.
learning, and it was an important initial step. It really was. And then this fellow, Ed Kadlubkiewicz, he was from Poland. And I think the story's accurate that he was a political refugee. That was back in Lech Walensa's time when Poland was really going through a lot of upheaval and change. But he was phenomenal. I mean, really, I certainly learned that with iron, the limitation is your creativity rather than the iron that you're working with.
That's right,
Yeah.
that's right. How did you get into wildlife rehabilitation?
Yeah, I sort of formalized my interest when Dr. Sveck, Ron Sveck at the
Yes.
Vermont New Hampshire Clinic, he's the only vet in the southern part of the state, in the southern half of the state, that does wildlife, wild bird rehabilitation. And he had a broad-winged hawk. He had set a wing. It needed space to recuperate. It needed food. And we had built a barn, and I had a stall that was available. And that initiated me taking the steps to get my license.
And had you ever done it before? Have you ever rehabilitated birds before that, Fred? Besides when you were a kid and you didn't get to rehabilitate that one bird?
No, it wasn't a rehabilitation, but my experiences at the Academy of Natural Sciences were quite exciting. I mean, we had red tail that I would use, and a barred owl, and a great horned owl. So I had quite a bit of interaction with these birds, but no, I hadn't done any rehabilitation other than as a kid, maybe helping something out.
Right. You've been doing this for 40 years. I didn't realize it had been that long.
Close to that. Yeah.
And it's been always birds, pretty much?
Well, no, actually, I started with both mammals and birds.
Oh, you did?
And that's a whole other demand. Patty Smith is the one that does the mammals now, and baby mammals need 24 hours a day attention. The birds, baby birds, sleep at night. So from dawn to dusk, you might be feeding baby birds every half hour or so, but at sundown, they quiet down. Yeah.
So was that one of the reasons you stopped doing
Definitely,
mammals?
yeah. You know, it was that, and then the kids grew up.
Yeah.
I mean, they used to participate. I mean, it's so many stories with
That's
them.
true, yeah.
Once we got this little meadow vole that it was the size of this joint on my finger, totally naked, and my daughter said, well, Daddy, you have to take care of it. I said, well, we'll try, but there's not much hope. And I would, with a hypodermic syringe, squeeze fluid into it. And the skin was so thin, you'd actually see the belly fill up with the formula. The damn thing lived, you know. she built a terrarium, got a terrarium. It had swings, ramps, and it was, I don't want to exaggerate, but it connected to her.
Yeah.
And then when we had a wonderful father-daughter moment where I said, Kestrel, you know, after it was feeding totally on its own, you know, we have to let this meadow vole go. And she said, but it might not survive. I said, yeah, it might not, but this is what we have to do. She said, will it find other meadow voles? I said, I can't guarantee that. I think so. So we went on this gorgeous early autumn day into our field, and we sat down, and she had the meadow vole in a little box, and she took it out and was holding it. Yeah. And she said, do you think it's ready? I said, yeah, I think so. So she put this ridiculous thing down that we would be, you know, snapping in our traps on other occasions, and it scampered away.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. And she did okay with that?
Well, you know, tough moment for a little kid, tough moment for a dad.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
But it's another moment of mortality, right?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And to nurture something like that for a long time.
Yeah, and I just wrote a poem this past week. I had to euthanize a barred owl.
Oh.
And the poignancy, I will never take that lightly. And I know the protocol, and I know what needs to be done, and I know it's supposed to be fairly benign. I use a CO2 tank, you know, enclosure. But I just hate that ominous burden of being the one that turns on the gas and takes a life, you know?
Yeah, you're dealing with a lot of different things.
Yeah.
A lot of different things.
And conversely, the moment when you release these birds into the wild, you know, there's just, oops, I can't do that. I was gonna hit my heart.
Yeah, you can do that, yeah.
But it's,
It is, but there's a lot of poignancy with it. And just so the audience gets a little bit of an understanding, Fred has really created a sanctuary on his property in this barn, and there are little enclosures where, you know, each bird has its own enclosure, and you have various tenants, or you actually have sort of an Airbnb for these guys, right? They come and they stay a while.
You hope for that. You hope it's sort of the halfway house before they move out on their own. I do have a raven. I'm trying to find a home for this raven. I'm not supposed to keep birds on a permanent basis.
Right.
And Finns knows about it. Other organizations know about it. To keep a bird, you have to have all sorts of federal licenses, and you can't just keep it because you're a nice person. You have to be utilizing it in some public way. So. And
Fred, you get a lot of phone calls, don't you, of people who find an animal in the wild and that's hurt, and they bring them to you.
Yeah. I think a part of my service is just being empathetic to people when they call, and some people are just really desperate to do something, and I've certainly told people to bring me birds that I don't think have much chance to survive, but in some way it serves them to be able to hand it over to someone else. And I really think people reach out, and I've had such a diversity of people bring me birds. You know, I've had seedy guys, gals with a case of open beer between them in a pickup truck, holding a great blue heron.
Oh my God.
Which is a pretty formidable creature. Yeah.
Wow.
To a woman once that drove up in her Mercedes convertible with
crosses all lines.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, that's incredible.
I think the birds give us the opportunity to put aside political, social, religious, all judgments, and it sort of touches a common place in us.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for animals.
Yeah.
Having animals in your life
Yeah.
for many different reasons.
Yeah, yeah.
And you've touched on so many of them, and I know that and there's such an intimacy with that too. You know, I was over at Fred's house the other day, and he has a barred owl who's a resident right now. And you know, if you've never seen an owl up close, which most people haven't,
Yeah.
they've never had that opportunity, it's extraordinary. You know, and immediately there's an emotional reaction. And to look at the majesty of this animal and the feathers and
Yeah.
oh yeah, it's an amazing
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I
Yeah.
feel so privileged to have that experience time and again with different birds.
Yes, you work so beautifully with metal work and from your blacksmithing experience, and also wood, creating things out of wood. And I have seen many of the things that you've made over the years, which are just, you know, really wonderful and delightful and
Thank you.
beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome. I appreciate them very much. And you know, I wonder, I think especially with the work you do with wood, when you see, and I know that you see pieces of wood all over the property and you're culling, you know, from your own backyard, literally. What is the process that you have with that piece of wood? Because something draws you to it.
Well, it's usually it's a configuration, and sometimes it suggests something right from the get-go, and then sometimes it's just a configuration that's unusual, and sometimes I trip over these things for years and years before I finally do something. But I guess my modus is to see something that resembles something in my mind, and then make it a little more close to what I see.
Yeah.
But I like it to maintain that original integrity,
Yeah.
or
You're bringing something out.
Yeah.
The little project you had with the metal figures.
Oh yeah, the claw.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I don't know if everybody knows what a clawfoot tub is, but they have 4 legs that come down, and oftentimes there are these 3 talons that go over the ball of the clawfoot tub. And a neighbor gave me one. Joellen Falk gave me one, and she said, I thought you might do something with it. And I've had a great time just grinding away and modifying. I don't add anything to them, but I made faces, and then you can turn them over and set them up, and they just look like little people.
Yes.
And each one has its own unique personality, which is a wonderful aspect to them.
Indeed, it does.
Yeah.
And you have done how many of them?
Well, you saw, I think, 6 or 8 on our mantelpiece, and I've passed along 80 of those to people over the years. Yeah.
And I believe, at least when I received mine, out of the goodness of your heart, there were, I believe, 2 stipulations.
Well, that's my wife. I think that's Debbie. I think the stipulation was when Fred dies, and we have a get-together, people bring their coffee, and we'll just display them in some appropriate spot.
Yes. And
was that one stipulation? There's 2 stipulations?
The other one I remember was keep your eyes peeled for other claw
that's right.
feet.
You bring me 4 claw feet, and I'll make you a face.
Yes, right. So, so that kind of segues into the next thing we can talk about, which, as I said, Fred has this amazing barn with tenants, you know, various birds usually, but they're beautiful, and he makes these wonderful wooden perches for them, and swings, and you know, all kinds of. It's sort of like Kestrel's terrarium. You know, they're like playhouses for these animals. But you also have something else in the barn that's unusual.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, if we are both talking about the same thing, would that be my coffin?
Yes, indeed.
Oh, gracious. Years ago, I had a dear friend, and her father died. And she asked if I would come with her to the mortuary, or to the funeral home, to help her select a coffin. And one day I just found it incredibly exploitive of a woman in pain, and incredibly expensive. And I said, no way, I don't want to do that. And you could be buried in Newfane at least. I don't know if this is in Vermont. You can be buried on your own property. Board of Health comes, checks out your site, makes sure you aren't going to be leaching into somebody's well.
Yes.
And I picked up $80 worth of lumber at the most, and I made my own coffin. I made 6 handles, so it'll be easy to carry. So for a grand total of probably less than $250, I'm set to go.
You're right.
Yeah. And in part, this is a great leverage. If anybody here is married and listening to this, but it's great leverage because Deb often accuses me of not thinking beyond where I am at the moment. And so whenever she says, Fred, did you remember to take out I said, no, but I got my coffin ready to go. You aren't going to have to worry about that.
That's one thing you don't have to worry about.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely plain. But the other remarkable thing about it.
I had a friend who gave me a quote. It's a John Prine quote, and it's, he lived in heaven before he died. And she said, Fred, I really think you ought to stick this on your coffin. So I stapled this quote up there, and then other people said, oh, I have a quote you might like. So I have everything from Yogi Berra to, Copernicus to just people who have things. As a matter of fact, I think you said you had a quote for me.
I do have a quote for you to add to that. And the quote is from Howard Frank Mosher, and it was in one of his Kingdom County novels. And it was on a tombstone, and it said, live each day, not as if it's your last, but as if it's the last day of each person you meet.
Wow, that's wonderful.
I love that.
Yeah.
It turns the whole thing around.
Yeah.
And I will give that to you, Fred, and you can staple it on that. And,
And just one other aspect to that coffin. It seems a little macabre to some people. It doesn't seem at all macabre to me because I look at it every day. But it's a reminder of the fragility of our existence.
That's right.
And one of the quotes is, every day's extra. And I really try to. And did I tell you that coffin has been used on 3 different occasions?
Yes, please tell.
Well, Leland and Gray players were doing the music production Oliver. And Annie Landberger, the director, there's a mortuary scene, and the stage crew was trying to build the coffin out of a refrigerator carton, and they were having a terrible time doing it. And Mrs. Landerberger said, oh, I just wish we could get a coffin somewhere. Mrs. Landerberger, I know somebody that has a coffin. So she called Fred. Said, Fred, would it be okay? I said, yeah, of course. So that was used in the production.
And that coffin has made 3 appearances.
It has made 3 appearances in addition to the appearance in the barn where
it's currently playing. Oh, Fred, that was lovely. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for being on the show.
What fun.
I know that there are many, many more stories.
Oh my gracious, you're just getting me started
I
here,
know
Lenny.
I am. I'm just greasing the wheels, and pretty soon you'll have your own show on BCTV. The Fred Homer Show. Everyone will tune in. Thanks,
this is
Fred.
great. You're quite welcome. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for joining us today. I loved hearing these stories. I'm sure you enjoyed them as well. We will see you next week.